Welcome to Hollywood Insider Help, where you can learn more about how to earn a good living as an author, screenwriter, producer, or podcaster. Remember, you can find great live and on-demand training designed to help you earn a good living making media you love at nancyfultonmeetups.com and nfm24.com. Our host is Nancy Fulton. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Fulton, and I'm a writer-producer. And if you want to, I do run events for 25,000 entertainment industry pros. You can look them up on nancyfultonmeetups.com or entertainmentindustryevents.com, and you'll find events coming up and also recordings of events I've done in the past. And tonight we are here with Larry Jordan, who has amassed a huge number of credits, including Fallen, Assassin, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, CSI Miami, and NYPD Blue. And he's worked for some of the world's largest entertainment companies, Time Warner, Sony, Fox, MGM, HBO, Netflix, and Disney, as well as having worked with many of the top creatives in the industry. And with having said all that, Larry, do you want to talk for a few minutes about how you sort of moved into the industry? And maybe this is a good time for you to mention the solution that you've built to sort of pass on your knowledge of editing to people that are just coming into the entertainment industry.
Sure. I mean, it's a bit of a long road, but I'll try to make it, I'll try to edit, self-edit. And, I got into the industry. I was born into a family of craftspeople. My grandfather was a projectionist and a sound engineer. He started as a kid back in the Nickelodeon days in Times Square. And subsequently, my father became a film editor, started out in the animation business, and eventually moved into the commercial business. And this was at the birth of television commercials in the 1960s. He had 60 people working for him at one time. So I kind of grew up around film. And then, of course, as I got older in my teenage years, a lot of people that came out of my dad's shop moved into feature films. And, being from a film family, we loved movies and we loved TV and we watched a lot of it and a lot of films, obviously. And, honestly, I couldn't imagine ever doing anything else except for working in some facet of motion pictures. And I loved cinematography and I loved, acting. But I eventually found myself sort of gravitating towards editing because it was something that I really knew. I had a lot of hands-on experience even as a kid. And I thought and I learned that that's where, films actually get, sort of shaped and made, and you solve a lot of problems. And it was a very satisfying, career. So that's what I did, and I worked my way up, and I was very lucky. I worked for some really great editors. I worked for the legendary Dede Allen, who cut Bonnie and Clyde and all of Paul Newman's films and Warren Beatty's films, some of Warren Beatty's films. I worked for Lindsay Klingman, who cut Hair, and was one of the editors on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She was an amazing editor. And as an assistant, I kind of came up under these people. I worked for Richie Marx on Terms of Endearment. That was one of my first films. I was an apprentice editor. I mean, one notch above Schlepper. And but you really learn a lot being in the cutting room with these people. Even if you're not directly editing yourself, you learn the practicalities of everything from how to work with the film to office politics, which is very important in our business. And then, of course, came the digital revolution, and I saw it coming with videotape, but I wasn't really that interested in videotape because it had a lot of numbers, and I really, didn't like numbers. I'm not really a math person, and I sort of ignored videotape and stuck with 35 millimeter film and continued on my assisting career. And then, sort of like when I was getting ready to make the transition to full editor, the digital editing explosion happened, and it changed everything. And I saw it very early on, back in the early 90s. And when I did see it, a light went off. It was like, that's it. That's my future. I got to learn that. So I immersed myself in digital technology. And it was a whole new world to me because I wasn't really a computer guy, but I became one. In fact, I was working on Little Man Tate with Jodie Foster when all of this stuff started happening, and she had like a Macintosh in her room, a color screen Macintosh, and it was really high end. And when it broke down, somebody from Apple flew down to fix it. That's how awesome it was. And she let me hang out and play on her Macintosh. And I was teaching myself about, sort of like the fundamentals of this stuff, and I was off to the races. And I learned the Avid Media Composer, which is the primary tool of professional film and television editors. Even though you hear a lot about Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere, I mean, they do have their place, but Avid is, what 99% of all film and television shows are edited on to this day. And I became kind of like the guy. I was like the young hotshot who knew digital editing, and I got this job working at Stephen Bochco Productions on a show called Civil Wars. And soon after that, they went into development and pre-production on a show called NYPD Blue. And Greg Hoblet, the director, Greg Hoblet, from Hill Street and all the great Bochco shows, asked me if I wanted to cut the pilot for NYPD Blue.
Wow.
And it was just like, yeah, I mean, it was just such a thrill, and I was obviously honored to be in the room with people like Stephen Bochco and David Milch, and just that whole crew over there. It was fantastic. And the show was a huge hit. We, got nominated for 26 or 29 Emmys the first season. I got nominated, and but I wanted to do features, so I kind of really sort of like was, focused on that. And, back in those days, television was a little bit sort of like, I don't want to say looked down upon, because obviously NYPD Blue was an excellent product. But features were, I came up in the days of like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, and like I said, Bonnie and Clyde, Dog Day Afternoon, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I wanted to make those kind of, sort of like epic feeling movies that really moved me and I knew moved other people. So that's what I went for. And, I just sort of like just tried my best to get into that rotation. And I got lucky. I did cut some fairly decent movies. Greg asked me to cut Fallen for him with Denzel Washington a few years later, and
hey, you got to work on Little Man Tate. That's one of my favorite films, actually.
I did. That was still on film, but working with Jodie Foster was, again, it was just a real thrill and a privilege. She is such a smart and delightful person. And my mentor, Lindsay Klingman, basically cut most of Jodie's films as a director. I got my first associate editor credit on that film, so it was really great and a lot of fun.
So, and actually, you just did Naked, starring Marlon Wayans and Regina Hall for Netflix. So you're still,
yeah,
Netflix is the new television, isn't it?
Well, Netflix is not only the new television, but they're making a lot of original feature films, and they are the new studios. I mean, Netflix and Amazon, and now Apple is moving into original content production. These are the new powerhouses, and frankly, there is so much work out there for everyone. I read in the LA Times a few months ago about how production has increased, by a large percentage this year, and post is always sort of like still in LA because once they shoot out of town, a lot of stuff is shot out of town. Everybody still comes back to LA for the most part to cut. I mean, obviously New York has a pretty busy industry, and again, growing. Atlanta's busy. There are pockets, New Orleans and stuff like that. But most directors live here, and when they're finished shooting, they want to come back and cut close to their house. So, there's just been this explosion of work, and getting to the second part of what you had mentioned, this is one of the reasons why my assistant on Naked and I decided to create this course, because it's the proverbial catch-22. You can't get a job unless you have the skills, and you can't get the skills unless you have a job. You need to get into a cutting room to learn the workflow. So we decided to create a course which teaches the feature film assistant editor workflow from start to finish. And, parts of it can be applied to television, a lot of it, in fact. But we wanted to create a course. We wanted it online so people can access it, 24/7, 365. They could refer back to it and really sort of study the method. And so it's not really a computer course. It's almost like a prerequisite to know the Avid, to take the course. But we wanted to give kind of like the experience. So what is it like when you get the job? What are the conversations you should have with your editor to meet their needs? What are the pre-production meetings and post-production pipeline meetings that happen, usually sometimes before you start shooting and other times in the first couple of weeks, to, sort of like know who your key players are, your sound people, music people. Sometimes those people are involved very early on, your visual effects crew, etc. So we take you from like that very beginning stage and what the assistant editor's role is at that stage, all the way through production, dailies, the editor's cut, the director's cut, the studio's cut, and producer and studio's cut, and then we go, in all the different versions and changes and, and how, and the iterations of visual effects, how they start in one place and they end up in another. And then the finishing process, sound turnovers, picture turnovers, final visual effects, the mixing stage. We talk a lot about music and working with the music editor, because music is such an integral part of really sort of like the rough cut and then the director's cut. I mean, we're delivering almost, finished soundtracks digitally these days. It's not like the old days when you would have like a couple of tracks and do it. We're doing this stuff in the Avid, and it's very complex stuff. So, and then of course finishing, the digital intermediate, color correction, and now digital delivery, including DCPs and and getting and delivering in different formats. Sometimes they still finish on film. So we talk about all of that, and we really, aimed at preparing the aspiring film editor as an assistant editor to, have the skills they need to enter the field. And the response has been great. I got to tell you that people have really, you don't realize how much you know until you talk to a person who's just starting out and wants to learn what you know. And, these people are just so grateful and enthusiastic and have really great questions. And the course comes with a sort of like a private members-only Facebook group where we can sort of, they can ask questions and get feedback. And it's been terrific. And we've only been, at it like 6 months.
Wow.
And we've put over like 145 people through the program already, and we're looking forward to doing more. We're going to be speaking at NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Vegas. Actually, we're speaking at Avid Connect, and we're going to have a breakout session about the course and the training, and also we're going to have kind of like an assistant editor's roundtable.
Really, that'll be very interesting.
Television and features. And just so I say, the reason we did assisting is because that is really the traditional path to becoming a film editor. Yes. I mean, sometimes people think they come out of film school and they've learned how to edit, they're just going to become an editor. It's wonderful, and maybe it happens for a very small fraction of people, but really the route is to come up through the ranks. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it is today.
Well, I think particularly if you're going to be working with, if you're going to be working for a one of the big studios or Netflix or releasing content, original media for Netflix and so forth. Because the thing is, they're handing you when they go out and they shoot stuff. They may be spending $100,000, per day. They may be spending, they're spending millions on the content, so they can't just
Right.
hand the stuff over to an editor who isn't going to turn that into a film that looks like a film and isn't capable of delivering all the stuff that that they need or the distributors need when they're selling the content worldwide. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the guy ultimately the guy who ends up manipulating all of the content and all the different kinds of content into a final product is the editor. So I can see, you do need somebody who's seasoned. I think it's if you to work, to work at the sort of top of the industry, it's not going to be something they do.
Lightly.
You're just not going to hand the content to anybody else.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's strange because even, after having done this for, 25 years as an editor, 35 in the industry, they still drill you. They still want to know what you've done. I mean, obviously they looked at your resume, but they want to have the confidence that you're going to be able to deliver a film or a television show, a cable show, whatever. And you're going to be able to solve the problems that are going to come up, because that's the editor's job. You're a problem solver. That's the assistant's job. And invariably, they want people who have been through, the training and who've been through the trenches. And,
well, and also there's the size of the data that you're managing. I think one of the things that's so shocking is the size of the data that you're managing in terms of terabytes, in terms of is so massive. And the work that you have to do when you're creating the new content. So you get the raw data in, you have to look at it, you start splicing it together, you start putting in all the transitions, you start putting in, and it just, even one, it has to be artistically perfect. Two, it has to incorporate all these elements, and three, you have to not lose it because you can lose hundreds of thousands, of dollars worth of work. If you've got a lot of people pouring content, and then somehow or other it's not backed up correctly, it's not stored correctly. It's not stored at the right resolution, so, which are kind of newbie mistakes. It's not mistakes that people who are seasoned make.
They're newbie mistakes, but it's funny because I had lunch today with a sound designer friend of mine who's worked on a lot of, huge films. He worked with Michael Mann and Pete Berg and people like that. And and he told me that he's amazed at the people that kind of cross his path who, just don't have the training. They might have gone to film school. They might have worked in sort of like the independent world or wherever people, break into the business, quote unquote. But again, the feature and television workflows are very specific. They're very, they've been standardized to a certain extent, especially now that digital has taken over. Animation has its own specialized workflow, so you really need to have some chops on that. And and that's how I started out kind of like in action and sort of more dramatic stuff, and then I got a chance to cut some comedies, and then I started only getting offered comedies.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where I'm at as an editor right now. It's like, even though I cut the pilot for NYPD Blue, people know me now more as a comedy editor. And
it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing. You get typecast, right? If you do anything well one time, like whatever you did last that you did well, that's what they're gonna come back to you for, and you'll spend your whole life trying to explain.
Actually, it's really true, and it's the same thing with a great assistant editor. A lot of times, because it gets tougher to make the transition because you're so good, people don't want to let you do anything else. They don't want to lose you in that role.
Well, and I think we sort of touched on the fact, sort of the background an editor needs in order to be allowed to handle a big film. A lot of the people that I support are producing their first film, or they produced a number of films, and they're sort of going up higher and higher with every budget that they do. And could you talk for a few minutes about why an editor is key to the success of a film, and specifically why somebody might be, people a lot of times think they should hire, they think they know they have to hire a director, they know they have to hire good actors, they know they need a screenplay, but it's shocking how many people think anybody can edit their film. So you want to talk for just a few minutes about when the editor should be hired and why an editor is so key to ensuring that the film that you produce is going to be marketable.
Well, we've touched on it a little bit. An editor is look, film is a collaborative medium, and I have no illusions, and would not go on to tell anyone that the editor is sort of like working in a vacuum. Obviously, they do a first cut. The director comes in, and they work for many, many weeks with the director, and then the producers come in, and they start giving their notes, and then the studios come in, and they start giving their notes, and then you go to previews, and you start getting notes from the actual audience. So it's a very collaborative effort, and there are often times when the editor will, because of the volume of data that we were talking about just a minute ago, will sort of like just not even have an opportunity to see everything, because you're under deadlines, you're moving so fast. But fundamentally, the editor assembles the first pass of the movie. It's called the editor's cut. Sometimes people call it the editor's assembly, and some people get edgy about it. It's really a cut. It's a fairly well sort of executed cut done in the period of time allotted, which is during production. You usually get a couple of weeks after production. But the thing is, you really as the editor, you really kind of need to show the director everything they shot. So sometimes, I've worked on films where the first cut of the film was 5 hours long, and so as the editor, you obviously know you're not going to release a film in 5 hours, but you have to cut all the scenes. And sometimes when things are improv, you have to cut all the improv, and you cut different versions of scenes because they were done 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different ways. And then, you kind of really, the editor has to love movies, and they'll have an instinct. This isn't working. This isn't going to end up ultimately end up in the film.
So their taste is actually kind of your first real world check for whether or not the footage is good and whether or not the film is going to work.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll put something in the first cut and you'll things that they'll just never see the light of day. They're just no good. And also what you're doing when you're doing your first cut is you're sort of establishing a rhythm for a lot of the movie. Obviously, the director's going to come in and have their own feelings about things, but there's nothing sweeter than when you show the film to a director and you're working through it and they're tearing apart the scenes and stuff, but then there comes a scene where they're just like, Larry, that scene plays exactly as I envisioned it or better, and I don't want to touch it. And it's just like, wow, that's fantastic. That's a real compliment. And, you ultimately end up touching it no matter what for some reason. But, it's kind of like you've laid this foundation. You've put you've sort of like, you imbued it with a tempo and a rhythm. And in television, it's even more important because there's just not a lot of time to rip it apart. Mm-hmm. You're on a very sort of factory kind of production, production line, and you're banging stuff out. So, I think it's even more important in television sometimes because there's not a lot of times for changes. The director comes in sometimes for 2 or 3 days at most,
and then
the
like
producers. Yeah, exactly. But you asked a question which I think is an important one because sometimes new filmmakers, young filmmakers, they ask when should the editor be brought on. And I've been in situations where the editor isn't brought on until after the production is finished. And that's usually a red flag and a potential nightmare situation because you want to be able to create that first cut as an artist, as a craftsperson, you want to be able to create that first cut in peace, and you don't want to have somebody breathing over your shoulder and waiting for you to bang out scenes. And when you hire the editor, in studio films and television, the editor is hired before the production begins, 99% of the time, and they start cutting the second day of dailies, the second day of production, because they get the first day of dailies on the second day. And that way, it's also economically smart, because at that point, when they finish production, the editor's very close behind, and usually, I've turned over cuts in a few days, up to a few weeks, and then the director can get in there, and you can stay on schedule. So,
and if you see, and is it possible that as an editor, when the shooting, the stuff's coming in and you're cutting it, that you'll notice that there's something missing, or that there's a transition that wasn't made, or something's not clear? That
Absolutely.
you can, and they still have the sets up, they still have the actors, everybody's in place. You can actually send them back right then, instead of having to try to reassemble that 6 months later.
Exactly, and I'm able to create QuickTime files, and I'm able to send them to the director and say, wouldn't it be great? Do you think it would be okay if you got this insert of this, or maybe, like you say, are you happy with this transition? And you can sort of like get real-time feedback, and again, solve problems as they're shooting, and like you say, before they wrap sets and move on to different locations that they're not going to go back to. And that's another reason to have an editor on early, and sort of be sort of like the scout for anything that might be problematic.
And also, they can confirm that the data's actually coming in right, because you never can tell. Everybody's shooting on all these digital cameras. You're often shooting with multiple cameras, so the editor is going to be the one that looks at the data that's coming in and gone, okay, well, if we didn't want to have all the frames,
yeah, no, exactly,
this camera would be good, but it actually drops out. It's kind of a drag.
From a purely technical standpoint, absolutely, you're doing QC on the material. A certain amount of that is done at the laboratory. The post house that either does dailies or processes some stuff. But I've been on films where we process the stuff in the cutting room. We've sunk, even on Naked, we sunk our dailies in the cutting room. There are ways to save money and things like that. But absolutely, as soon as you see a digital hit on a shot, you've got to flag it, and you've got to get it to the director and say, are you okay with this? Can we live with this? And now, of course, unless it's really, really bad, you can fix a lot of stuff with digital, with CGI and things like that.
Well, you can, but it still costs. So that's never a good thing. So it sounds like you're saying that to a significant degree, the editor is a kind of a true partner to making sure the director actually gets what he wants. So it's pretty important to hire pretty early on, just because you want to make sure that they're on board with the vision, and that the film's getting cut as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and if you look at the director-editor relationships, like Marty Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker, Lindsay and Jodie Foster, Richie Marx and Jim Brooks, who worked together for years and years on. You develop this sort of like trust, and you develop this, you find out that you have similar tastes, and you develop also, which is kind of like the nicest part, you develop a shorthand where you're working through a scene, and both of you, the director and yourself, will have the same idea at the same time, and you'll execute the idea before it comes out of the director's mouth, and they'll say something like, I was just going to say that, and that's a great place to be. I kind of have that relationship with the director that I've worked with on the last two films, Mike Titus. He's a super talented guy, and he is somebody who's super talented on the technical end. He really knows every one of the gadgets on the set, the cranes, the cameras, yada, yada, yada. And then, he's great at story, and he's really funny, and he appreciates editing, he respects it. So it's kind of like I finally, after all of these years, have gotten into an ideal situation, working situation with the director. That makes the whole process just a lot more fun.
Can you talk for a few minutes about, so there's a film editor, and then there's the post-production supervisor. And my understanding is the post-production supervisor is basically responsible for making sure, he's like an administrative position in terms of making sure that all the deliverable and all the requirements are met to actually, pump things into the market. The editor is the creative guy that's actually doing all of the work, but the guy that's sort of keeping track of what gets sent is
Yes.
the post-production supervisor. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and it's something that has evolved. During the period of time of I've been working in the business. You used to have sort of like a post-production supervisor at the studio who would oversee and kind of do that role for almost every movie.
Mm-hmm.
But again, those were simpler times, and because the logistics of digital and visual effects and the number of films and the sizes of the films got so much more complex. The role of the post-production supervisor really kind of came into its own. And I mean, because I worked with editors who sort of like did that, that's what they did. They sort of gaffed the administrative side as well as the creative side. But because things got more complex, and because the director and the editor didn't really want to be bothered with that administrative stuff, that role sort of really grew, and now it's critical. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing the things that they do because it would just take too much time away from actually plowing through all the material you have to go through.
Are they the one who serves? So they do. I'm thinking they actually do more than just the interface to the outside world, like distributors. They're also the ones who, if there's data coming in from a post-production house and data coming in from the sound people and data coming in from the music people, they're the guys that actually make sure that all of those guys' production timetables are on track, so that when the time comes to create the film, you're getting the data that you need from all of those sources as well. In other words, you can say, I need this, and this, and somebody else has to go find it because I have to cut this film. I can't play with this.
Every film is different, and every post-production supervisor kind of like has their own style. Mm-hmm. But quite often the post-production supervisor will work very closely with the assistant editor in terms of making sure all of that stuff, all the throughput is happening, all the timetables are being met, and and obviously the director and the editor, and sometimes just not even the directors, sometimes the editor will just be sort of clued in on everything, and they'll bless it and they'll say, yeah, that sounds good. But I got to tell you that these days, we did our last film for Netflix, Naked, and in about 30 days of production, they shot over 130 hours of film. Okay, that's close to 1 million feet of film, and it took Francis Coppola 3 years, to shoot, or a year and 3 years to complete to shoot 1 million feet of film. So again, the paradigm has shifted, that there's so much volume. Because of digital cinematography, you've eliminated the cost of the lab to a great extent, and you don't have to turn off the camera. It's just like your digital camera at home. I mean, how many times do you shoot like 100 shots of something just to figure out where am I going to put that on my hard drive? It's because it's easy and it's free, essentially. And so the volume of material that editors are getting these days is just it's overwhelming to a certain extent. And on the bigger films, you have more than one editor. You have 2, 3, 4, sometimes more than that. And again, because of that workload, you really need another person working, with your assistant to make sure all of the timetables and schedule stuff is being is being coordinated and executed on time.
Do you think that there's do you see when you're looking at films that are shot that way with sort of the infinite number of takes that are you can 20 takes of every scene or whatever? Do you think that there's a cost to doing that in terms of people getting exhausted because from the first 4 or 5 days of the shoot, where doing every scene 20 times? Does it give them less sort of energy when they get to the end of the film and they've still got, that seems like it would be incredibly grueling to do 20 takes of every scene.
Well, everybody has their own, everybody has their own sort of working methods and their own style and their own sort of like stamina level. I remember being at the end of shoots on film back in the film days, and people were exhausted just the same. You're exhausted at the end of a shoot, from my experience, no matter what you're shooting on. I don't necessarily know that digital makes it any tougher. I just think that everybody kind of, works in their own style, and some people thrive on it. Some people thrive on the spontaneity of not having to cut after every take, and just let's do it again. Okay, let's do it again. Because you don't have to stop. And when you stop on set and there's 150 or 200 people around, it's tough to get those people quiet again and ready to do another take. So again, it's sort of like keeping the energy level up. I don't know, I'm not on set, but I would imagine that there's a certain amount of certain level of burnout that you get working at that kind of level of intensity. But some people thrive on it.
Well, and I think it also may be different. I mean, there's sort of the notion of loosely scripted things these days, which is actually all of Apocalypse Now, but they didn't know that's what it was called.
Yeah. Right.
But the loosely scripted stuff, where they actually do sort of find things through performance. I don't know. I've seen a couple of times where I'm just like, if I have to watch this scene again, I don't know how much energy I'm going to have, and also I don't know which take you're going to like. So if I have to go through 20 takes, how do I know that maybe my first take is going to be the third take, but my co-star's best take is going to be the fifth take. So does that mean we're going to have to do 20 takes to try to get one where we both did those great performances again? It's just very stressful. So
well, sometimes that is the case, and that's where we get involved, and we we pace those things together. And then you've got guys like David Fincher who shoot stuff in a manner that they can actually use one side of the frame from one take and the other side of the frame from another take. You know what I'm saying? So, again, digital sort of like lets you do that, and and it's fantastic because he's getting really what he wants. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you've got 20 or 30 takes or something, I mean, it comes down to a matter of opinion. I think that any number of those 20 or 30 takes might make for a fine performance. But again, at that point, you're just trying to make you've got a job to make one movie. I mean, you can make 10 movies out of the volume of material that's being delivered today. So it's just a matter of deciding on the one that everybody thinks is best.
Well, and actually, I've heard somebody say, film is never finished. It's just abandoned. You just give up. I guess it's done because I don't want to work on it anymore.
That's John Ford. Yes, absolutely. A famous quote from John Ford, and it's absolutely true. I mean, at a certain point, you just can't. You don't know how much more you can look at it, and it gets tough. And that's why people, get removed from films, from the director to the editor. They think, well, they're not fresh anymore, and we need a fresh pair of eyes.
It does turn into wallpaper at some point. You just go, I can recite the dialogue. I can actually recite, the 110 minutes of this film. I know every word. I can tell you when the music's coming in. I can't look at it with fresh eyes. Every time I see a change, it just disturbs me because I can already recite this film.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. No, that's part of the job. But but you learn to try to maintain your objectivity as best as you can, and then again, other people are contributing at a certain
Yes.
point, and they're giving you feedback, and that's very helpful. I mean, when you show it to an audience, that's the true test of what the film has to offer, and whether or not it's going to be a commercial film or not.
That's true. Um, so if people are in the indie film world, when people
Yeah.
are looking to hire film editors to work on their feature, and they're shopping for them, sort of in um, development or early pre-production, what kind of characteristics would you have them look at? Would you have them look at their simply look at their list of credits and more credits, have them look at their credits, or would you have them look at people who are producing similar kinds of content to what they want to create, or would you go and where would you shop? Would you look on Production Hub? Like, how, if you were shopping for a film editor for an independent film, where would you look?
Well, I think that, again, I can only speak from my own experience. I think that most people find their editors through the agencies. There's all the big agencies have below the line divisions, and all of the almost every working editor I know has an agent to a certain extent. So, I think the producers and the directors go through and get resumes and get submissions, and they look at those credits and they see what resonates with them. A lot of times it just comes down to a director loving a movie that an editor directed, that an editor cut, and just like, it could be a movie that they saw in high school or college, and it was just, like kind of a seminal film for them, and they just want that person to cut that movie. With the independents, though, I mean, it's funny with the independents, because I've been on a lot of interviews on smaller films and things like that. They're always looking for, the top flight editors. They want quite often the people who cut, the big movies, and I guess the agents try to explain to them, they're not in your budget. It's so you have to consider what is in the budget to pay an editor, and that's a great opportunity for younger editors and editors without as many credits to get a shot, because they're willing to work for a price, and and they want to prove themselves. And I think that for indies, again, when you're working on a limited budget, that's something that you should really take into consideration. Who's this person? And then, of course, talk to the people they've worked with, talk to the editors they've worked with, talk to the producers and directors they've worked with, and find out what kind of person that they are to work with. Because that's the other part of the equation. I mean, someone could have awesome credits and be a total pain in the ass to work with. I mean, you're going to be locked in a room with this person for anywhere from 6 to 10 months or longer. You got to get along. They've got to have sort of like a personality that you can tolerate, and vice versa. The editor's got to be able to tolerate the director's personality.
It's true. People have to be in sync in order to be able to stand each other for long periods of time required to edit the film.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little like a marriage, you're in those rooms for many hours, and like you say, you're looking at stuff over and over again, and there are external pressures from the producers and the studios on the director, and you've got to be able to kind of like, sort of like navigate that those kind of like, emotional sort of, speed bumps and the pressures. And the same thing goes for you. I mean, as an editor, I mean, you're a human being. You have a family of responsibilities. You've kind of got to figure out, how to, sort of like, what's the expression people use? Compartmentalize.
Well, and I think in this town, it's some of the most creative people are not necessarily some of the easiest to work with.
Yeah.
It's nice when somebody that you're working with is actually very pleasant and straightforward. It's something certainly to look for. but you have
Yeah,
to kind of figure
yeah.
out what you can tolerate, what you can't.
Yeah, everyone has their moments. We're all
Mhm.
human, but I've found that some of the most some of the best people are also some of the most talented. I don't
Mhm.
think you necessarily have to be a crazy person to be successful or be
I don't think
creative.
so either, but it's shocking how much of the time the idea of the demanding genius, how common that idea is. And I think sometimes people actually become more demanding because they think that that's how you know you're a genius is because you're demanding and people let you get away with it or something. So, I mean, it's not all the time. It's just the nature of the business that. And again, I think with editing, because it is a very um, time-consuming activity, it does push people to the limit. You know.
Yeah, I mean I agree. I think that the idea of the crazy artist is somewhat of a somewhat of a cliche, frankly.
Mhm.
I don't think that we need to beat each other up I think that people who are too off the wall need to get on some sort of medication,
Yeah.
frankly. I mean, this is 2018. There are ways to
There are drugs. You should get
there
some.
are drugs for those people. But really, I mean, it's like, when you're a kid, though, when you're first starting out, you're willing to put up with anything. And when you're a kid and you're a director and you're first starting out, you're off the wall anyway. So,
Yeah.
there are so many factors. I don't know. I think I've mellowed with age, is what I'm trying to say, and I don't let things get to me like I used to as an editor. I don't take things as personally, and I don't have as big of an ego about my work, whereas I used to get defensive about things and this is my cut and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
That will not serve you as an editor. Trust me from experience. It is the director's film to a great extent, and the studio's film, and you're there to help them see their vision, and it's best to be someone who can work with people, and really, I mean, I think that I think that kind of time has passed in the industry.
Mhm.
The whole idea of the whole kind of concept of the auteur, I think, is
Yes.
also
Yeah.
something that's a bit of an anachronism.
Mhm. Or
There,
I think I was just going to mention or just going to ask you about. I mean, there are indie filmmakers who really do consider themselves to be sort of auteurs. They like and they and for that reason they have a strong desire to learn how to cut their own productions. And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't choose to work with an editor. They just want to understand the technology. Or when they're first creating their first films, they want to be able to do the editing because they are creating their brand. They're creating their first unique vision.
hmm
Um, can you talk for a little bit about? Do you think it's a good idea for indie filmmakers to invest the time and effort required to learn how to edit their first films, just so they can get what they want, or do you think they should just start learning how to work with
you know,
professional editors?
I don't think that it's a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them the ability to just understand an editor does. But I think that in the long run, it's it's counterproductive. I think that having an editor put together your film and give you a fresh perspective on the material, if for no other reason, is that just you can grab some new ideas. You can look at it with fresh eyes. You can always go back and try to assemble it the way, or tell the editor to assemble it the way that you thought it should be assembled. I mean, that's what directors do. But I mean, just from sort of just an experiential standpoint, going through those challenges of trying to solve the problems that editors have to solve, I think it's probably real good. I would assume that that's what a lot of directors who come up in film school do. They probably do a lot of their own cutting, and a lot of people who are kind of working on their own these days, and in the brave new world of content creation,
Mm-hmm.
are doing a lot of the things on their own. But again, when you've got when you've got such a huge burden on you. If you're working on a movie and it's $100 million budget, I mean, you've got a lot of people on your back.
Yeah, no, I think as the budget goes up, it becomes impractical. I guess it's just a question of, people that are working on, the 500. People work on the 100,000, 500,000. They get up into the, million, 2 million, 3 million, $5 million films, and as the budget goes up, they do end up working with professional editors.
True.
But the question is whether or not you think it's beneficial for them to actually get some kind of formal training in film editing, so that and actually practice what they learn to the extent that they can actually work more efficiently with their editor, or whether or not you think there's a reason why there's a division between the job of directing and writing, directing, and editing. Like there's a reason there's usually
let me
two
put
people
it this
for that.
way, and let me put it this way, and I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older, but if I was a director, I wouldn't want to do any editing, and I wouldn't want to really be on the machine. I'd want to sort of look at it from an objective standpoint. There are guys who cut, though. I mean, Jim Cameron cuts on all of his films, and he takes an editor's credit.
Right.
And again, if you're working in a world where you're working on $1 million budget, you might not have a choice but to cut the movie yourself. So, strictly from a financial standpoint. So, but in terms of that's what's nice about the studio system. That's what's nice about the system as it has evolved in Hollywood. You've got different people who are specialists at their craft, and they work together to to create something that ultimately will sort of fulfill the objective of the script and the objective of the producers and the financiers. But again, we're in this new world where you can shoot a movie with your digital camera in 4K and or your iPhone, for God's sakes.
Yep. People what was the name of that movie? Tangerine did that. They shot it on like 3 or 4 iPhone 5s,
Sure, and I am completely supportive of that sort of democratization of the media. I mean, I think that's great. But that's a different world. That's not the world that I sort of really. That's kind of like my fantasy world. I love the idea of kind of like these new tools and these. In fact, I was at Best Buy recently looking at these drones, and I thought, oh, you can get these fantastic aerial shots. And
oh, I know you have to stay away. Like you cannot go to those conferences where they have the big drones. Like they got some that are like weigh 70 pounds. And they can shoot like in every direction at once, and you're like, I need it for things. I don't know what I'm going to shoot it with, but I need it though.
but could you imagine? Like I can't imagine because I don't have this capacity. I'm not a writer. I'm not a director. I'm not I'm not one of these triple threats. But could you imagine being one of those people who, in this day and age and being like, I don't know, 21 or 22 years old and having all of these tools at your disposal and just like being able to go to town? It's fantastic what you could do. I mean, of course you need to work with actors and get talented people, but you could really do some amazing stuff. I mean, some of the young directors out there are just doing such imaginative, inventive stuff. And
there's going to be a day. There's going to be a day where somebody's going to come along who really does, who just makes it look so incredibly easy. I mean, I remember when people first saw Francis Ford Coppola or these guys working, The Godfather. Who would have thought you could make that interesting? It's just a bunch of guys. It's a bunch of good old boys, and they're just. I mean. Yeah, there's a few shootings, but somehow or other he elevated that to something that was way beyond what anybody else had done with that.
I mean, I think there are still people out there kind of doing that stuff. I mean, films like, Birdland and so inventive, and Del Toro's films, I think, are just, obviously Shape of Water has been nominated, and it's such an interesting, sort of approach to filmmaking. I mean, Pan's Labyrinth was certainly one of my favorite films of that year. And there's a lot of people who have this amazing sort of sense of vision, visual style. A lot of the really amazing directors that I've worked with are, artists. They can draw, they can communicate their vision to the people that they're working with, and that's a real gift.
I think so. So if somebody is a filmmaker and they want to pick up an understanding of the art of editing, is mastertheworkflow.com something that they should take a look at, or is it only really for people who want to work inside the studio system?
No, I absolutely think that, but it's not really about the art of editing. We're not really teaching the aesthetics of editing, and I want to make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's sort of like, for me, that's kind of like a personal journey. I mean, that's something you kind of do in sort of film theory classes.
Right.
But I don't feel that you can really learn the aesthetics of editing truly until you have actually sat down in front of, a computer and started editing.
So so Master the Workflow is teaching you the actual workflows, where the data comes in, what you do in what order, why this happens before this, why this has to happen after that.
Yeah, I mean, it enables you to have the skills to get yourself into a cutting room, because a cutting room and that environment is where you're going to learn editing. A lot of times by osmosis, because what happens is that me and the director will work on a scene for a while, and then we'll say to the assistant, "Hey, come in here and tell us what you think of this."
Mm-hmm.
And being the assistant, you will have had some real familiarity with the material, because you'll have input it, you'll have sunk it, and so on and so forth. And sometimes, the assistant will turn to us and go, there was a take where, Joe did this with his eyebrows or something like that. And I mean, that's the editing process, to a great extent. It's sort of like the discovery of what you have. And so as an assistant editor, the reason we wanted to create a course to train assistant editors was to get people actually in cutting rooms and be qualified to work in the environment where films are made. Now, it's not the purely creative work of the director and the editor, but it's the first foot. It's the first foot in the door. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think it's a difference. I mean, there's different tracks in the entertainment industry. Some people are going to be coming up through. Some people are going to go through the studio system and end up becoming, people that make, the 100 million, 300 million, $500 million films, and then some people are going to be coming up. They're going to be like Blumhouse, producing $6 million. The $6 million projects to start.
My first film that I did with the guy who directed Naked was a $2.5 million film.
Right.
But we still had 3 assistants on that film because of the volume of material. So we don't necessarily have to. We're not necessarily talking about $100 million movies. We're talking about all movies, independent films. They all have an assistant editor.
That's true. That's actually, and that represents a huge opportunity. The fact that people, even if you're going to produce your own films, being able to work as a assistant editor for somebody for 2 or 3 productions, that may well teach you a lot of things you need to know when you're working on your own project.
Again, this was the conversation I was having, with my friend this afternoon at lunch. He was like, you could go to film school and you could, study film, or you can go to work at 18 years old, and by the time you're 22, you will have developed a whole network of relationships and a whole set of skills. Now, I'm not discounting going to film school. It's a, it's a fine thing if you can afford it and if you can do it, but it's not a prerequisite for becoming a filmmaker. It certainly isn't. It wasn't for Steven Spielberg. It wasn't for Jim Cameron. It wasn't for a lot of people. So. There's a lot of ways that my point, and part of the reason to create Master the Workflow was to prepare people so they can just get in a cutting room. You know what I mean? Because again, once you find yourself there, your whole world changes. All the opportunity changes. The people that you're going to meet, the relationships you're going to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on when and where you start, they will last a lifetime, and the skills that you'll develop will be skills that you'll build upon. So it's not about budget. It's not necessarily.
You're right.
Makes sense. I have friends who work on $100 million films. My ex-assistant works on all the Marvel films. She did Iron Man and stuff like that. They have crews of 4 and 5 and 6 assistants.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a huge. You've made a lot of really good points about sort of your path through the entertainment industry. So the first question I get, I don't know if it's a question that anybody can really answer in the main. How much do you pay a professional editor? Does that vary based upon the project that people decide, the budget of the project that you're working on significantly? Like, in other words, so if you've got a $500,000 budget, it's going to be vastly different than the amount that you pay to hire an editor on a $3 million project.
There's one critical issue that determines that, and that is whether or not it's a union film or whether or not it's a non-union film. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's a non-union film, everything's fair game. Mm-hmm. Producer or a director or whoever can offer you whatever they want, and there are many people who will take whatever they offer because, again, you're getting an opportunity. Now, however, if it's a union film, there's a union contract, and if it's it goes by tiers. So if it's under a certain budget, if it's under $5 million, for example, it's a tier 1. And then there's a scale for an editor on a tier 1 project, and I think it's something like $2,500 a week.
Are you guys covered by IATSE, or which union are you guys covered by?
Yes, absolutely. The Motion Picture Editors Guild is Local 700, mm-hmm. and that's all editors, assistants, story editors, sound editors, music editors, and mixers. So and people who work in the background and sound, like the recordists and things like that. Mm-hmm. Not production people, not production mixers. That's a different union. But so then you've got the different tiers, and once you get over a certain tier, if it's a fairly large scale studio film, the scale for an editor is something like, it's about $3,000 a week. 30. Excuse me. It's something like $3,200 a week now. And, that's for, right around, ballpark same features in television. But most people cutting features, are getting above scale.
That makes total sense.
And then you're paid overtime for weekends, which you work quite often, and holidays and stuff. And you get medical coverage and things like that. And I'm a big sort of supporter of the union, the craft unions in Hollywood, because they protect people. They give people the opportunity to have medical insurance and things like that. So I would advocate for people trying to get into the union as quickly as possible.
And that kind of leads into our next question. It sounds somebody asked what hours do you usually work, and because I think. Normal, are you working the sort of normal 12-hour shoot day that people work? Which is common
much.
in the common for production, or do you work sort of a different set of hours?
When I was younger, when I started out, I would work pretty long hours. As an assistant, you work longer hours than your editor because there's things that you have to take care of after they leave that you can't take care of while they're there. And it's different in different parts of the production. Like during dailies, it's very intense. The film's coming in, you've got to prepare it for the editor. When you're turning over for sound and finishing, there's kind of like a period in the middle there where it gets a little bit mellower. But you can almost guarantee a minimum of 10 hours, usually closer to 12 or 14 hours a day for most assistants. Most editors work. They're contracted to work an 11.6-hour day, I try not to work over 10 hours a day. I'm just, I'm not getting any younger. I'll be perfectly frank. I burn out after a certain time, a certain period of time, I think a lot of people do. I think once you get into your 40s and beyond, you're spent by hour 10. And again, especially when you're looking at stuff over and over again, and you're looking at it very quickly because of digital technology. I think there's a much higher fatigue factor. So I don't know, but I know editors that work, again, on the bigger, huge budget films, 12, 14 hours a day, 6 and 7 days a week.
So is it the case that so this is the kind of thing that can be pretty hard on a family life. So it may not be the case. It may be the case that you do a production, rest up for a while, and then do another production. So you're not like totally killing yourself on the.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of freelance work is that you're on a film for 6 months, sometimes 10 months. At the long range, sometimes they last a year. Although animation films last for 4 years,
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
But yeah, you can get some time off and decompress and be with your family. There's no question. It's Hollywood is not a family friendly industry. In spite of what they might say, it's very demanding, and it's you shouldn't go. You and your partner should not go into it without sort of understanding the ground rules of what's required of people who are doing the jobs.
Right. Well, I think that's true for everybody that's in any aspect of the industry.
Absolutely.
Except for writers. Writers basically spend all of their time waiting. They never have money.
Movie stars seem to, kind of be able to make their own schedule, even if they're on a 12-hour shoot day. They're hanging out in their trailer a lot.
Well, yeah, but the difference is hopefully they're hanging out in their trailer with their spouse, but not their little dogs, because that gets everybody in trouble.
That's true.
Anyway, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. With your permission, I'll go ahead and I'll edit this up just for a little bit of brevity, make it clearer. I don't think I'll have to change anything that much, and then I'll make it available to those I support, and I'll send you over a link. And then if there's, does that sound pretty cool?
It sounds awesome. This was a great interview. I enjoyed it so much. You obviously have a lot of experience with the film industry and people who work in it, and you made it a real pleasure.
Well, you're very sweet. I think I used to work for many years as I got my start in technical writing, and I was actually teaching people how to do computer-aided design and animation with Max and Maya. And so I know how big those files are, and I know what handling that data is like. And I think editors have the hardest job on earth because there's just so much of it, and it's like, and people want you to know where it is every minute. They mention some scene they did somewhere, and you're like, they want you to know where it is, and you're like, dude.
Yeah. Give me a minute.
I have to think, okay? I have memorized your entire movie, and I have to remember what I called that. It was a long time ago.
Think about this. We don't even have the time to look at dailies anymore.
I know, it's true.
There's just no time. I mean, you're getting 5 and 6 hours a day of dailies. When do you have time to look at that? You have to look at it when you're cutting it. So it's a different process than it was. I mean, I remember the dailies process when I started out. I was on terms of endearment as an apprentice, and the whole crew we were staying at this motel in Houston, and the whole crew went to this kind of conference room where they set up a makeshift screening room, and it was sort of like this communal thing, and we, and it was kind of like a place where the editor got the first vibe about the performances and the material, and it just doesn't happen anymore. We all sort of work in a vacuum to a certain extent. I mean, not in production.
If you got 3 good minutes or 5 good minutes, you were like, yay, because you only needed 90 good minutes to make a movie, and you were like, yay, look how much we got done, and now they're sending you 6 hours, and you're like, seriously?
Yeah, and 3 of it's plates for visual effects.
Exactly. Too many. What is this thing I'm looking at? I don't even know what this is.
Looking at a blank wall with a ball, a silver ball. What does that mean?
It becomes very existential at 3 a.m, I'm sure. This is my life.
Very. Yes. You start a lot of self-examination at that point.
Anyway, you're wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me, and it must be a true pleasure to work with you on the project.
Oh, thank you so much. I look forward to hearing what you come up with.
Right. Excellent, man.
Okay. All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Hollywood Insider Podcast. If you have questions you'd like answered, guests you would like to suggest, or topics you'd like us to cover, please email Nancy at nancyfultonmeetups.com. If you like what you hear, please click to follow the podcast and give us a kind word in the comments. If you find our thoughts and suggestions help you, please share our podcast with other creators who need help. We love being of service to creative minds. This podcast is produced by No Better Friend Entertainment, and this audio recording was copyrighted in 2024. All rights reserved. Music for this episode is licensed for commercial use from pond5.com.